Hi Fude lovers! I'll be going over the Chikuhodo Homare series today. Timestamps will be in the description box. Grab some tea and snacks because this is going to be a long video. I'll start with discussing the details of the line, hair comparisons with other brands, handles, aesthetics, and quality. This is the most exciting Chikuhodo release in a long time and also the most expensive line they currently sell. Homare means honor in Japanese, so I take it Chikuhodo wishes this line to bring honor to their brand. The hairs are made out of Kazan squirrel, which Chikuhodo calls brown squirrel, but it's basically red squirrel. I think since red squirrel hair is usually very scarce, even more so than gray and blue squirrel, and brands don't typically carry a line of them or many red squirrel brushes, this line is enticing and the hairs became known to the regular makeup consumer or Fude buyer as something akin to unicorn fur. The other Japanese Fude companies do not have full lines with this much red squirrel hair stuffed into the ferrules. Tanseido's brushes have nowhere near as much hair in each of their red squirrel brushes compared to Chikuhodo's. I wasn't interested when it launched initially since red squirrel hair isn't a favorite hair type of mine and I felt like it was being overhyped, but I figured I should try two out, especially since each company treats their hairs differently, which in turn makes the hair from each brand stand out from one another. I initially tried the KZ2 and 5 out and really enjoyed both, then ended up picking up the 1, 3, and 4 after. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe and select all from the bell notification to be notified each time I upload a new video. To elaborate on different hair treatment, Chikuhodo Kazan, Koyudo, Tanseido, and my old Shosho long red squirrel hairs from several years ago are all very different from Chikuhodo's Kazan hairs. While Chikuhodo's, Koyudo's, Tanseido's, and my old Shosho long red squirrel hairs are thin and straight, and Koyudo's, Tanseido's, and Shosho longs aren't able to pick up much product, Chikuhodo's is the opposite with wavy hairs that are able to pick up product a lot better. The hairs pick up a lot of product if used with appropriate types of products such as loose powders and soft pressed powders. This is quite surprising to me since I'm not used to red squirrel hairs being able to pick up much at all. The closest hair I have to the Homare line are the red squirrel hairs from Zuvamore's African Rosewood line, which is a brand produced by Shosho Long. I bought the Zuvamore red squirrel brushes last year and the hairs are very similar to the Homare series, wavy, fluffy, less conditioned, and more in its natural state, and able to pick up lots of soft pressed products and apply heavier than all the other red squirrel hairs that I own. At first I thought Chikuhodo treats their hairs better than Shosho Long, but upon further inspection and touch, Chikuhodo's Kazan feels drier. The less conditioned, wavy hairs allow it to grab more product compared to the even silkier and straighter hairs of my Shosho Long red squirrel brushes from several years ago. Although the Zuvamore red squirrel cheek brush is silkier, Shosho Long didn't straighten the hairs like they did with the ones I bought in the past, and hence it performs very similarly to the Chikuhodo Kazan hairs. The Chikuhodo website and little slip that comes with the brushes recommends using them with loose and softly pressed powder products. Regardless of it being able to pick up more product compared to the red squirrel of other brands, red squirrel is not the hair type I would use when I'm in a rush. The hairs are incredibly delicate and fragile, even more so than gray and blue squirrel. Visually speaking, the hair clumping and greasing up is more apparent with red squirrel since the hairs are lighter. I broke a hair tip off just by wiping it carefully on my Chikuhodo cleaning cloth. I used them when my skin was dehydrated and dry but with a creamy base set with lots of powder, and other times on top of powder foundation. Despite my skin being dry at the time and generously powdered, the hair still managed to gunk up easily like gray and blue squirrel hairs. This hair type is not suitable for oily to combination skin or if you like to use lots of liquid and cream products, so please proceed with caution if you choose to try any out. The handles are made out of Mexican grandio wood which vary in color. Some are red-brown while others are a darker shade of brown. The wood feels lightweight, but the weight increases with the brush size. The lightest one is the KZ5 while the heaviest is the KZ1. They don't feel extremely lightweight due to the medium weight of the ferrules. The KZ4 and 5 weigh about the same as the Takumi T4 and 5, but the Kazan handles feel a little more substantial to me. I've also weighed the rest of my face brushes just in case anyone's curious. Sometimes the scale will vary the weight by 1 gram. The bottoms are flat and able to stand upright, but they stand precariously. Not all of the handles engraving are black, which is disappointing. Some of them are the color of the wood, which is hard to see. I inquired about the engraving and they laser engrave onto the handles for this collection. The company said that sometimes there is no color on the lighter wood, while sometimes there is the black color on the darker wood, which doesn't make sense to me because some of my darker wood handles have no black in them. The ferrules are a shiny black. Quality control has slipped over the years, and the bundling, handle engraving, and ferrules all vary. Chikuhodo used to have pretty consistent bundling along with Hakuhodo before, while Chinese brush makers were more inconsistent, but I feel like the tables have turned. Of course, there are different Fude masters or artists who bundle in their own way and will vary to a degree, but I definitely feel that they should be paying more attention to bundling their most expensive line compared to, say, the regular line, which is much cheaper. My Z-series brushes from a couple years ago are all bundled evenly too. Hakuhodo is still consistent, but Chinese brush makers like Shosholong have more consistent bundling compared to Chikuhodo now. Before I review each brush, I'd like to mention that I have sensitive combination skin for those of you who are new, and remember that brushes will work differently for everyone due to a variety of factors such as skin types, application styles, and products you use them with. Just because a brush doesn't work for me doesn't mean it won't work for you, and vice versa. If you're interested in any of these brushes, don't let anything I say dissuade you from trying them out. I have all of the face brushes, which are densely packed and have a lot of hairs. I don't plan on adding the eye brushes to my collection, but I'd love to know what you think of them if you have any. The KZ1 has the reddest hair of them all, and it looks even redder in person. I love the shade of red and wish the rest of the brushes were this red. The hair colors on each brush vary, and mine is redder than my friend's, who has a brown one similar to the shade of the rest of the brushes here. The hair length is 48 millimeters, which is in the sweet spot between 45 to 50 millimeters. My ideal powder brush lengths are 45 and 50 millimeters. It has an oval ferrule with the most hair out of the series. It also has a large square or rounded head depending on the bundling. Mine is a square shape and uneven on the top, while my friend's is rounded and even. It is the softest brush out of the 5, and they do vary in softness. It has low resistance, meaning it's quite bendy. Hers is on the right, and the shape of hers is more similar to my MK-1 and MK-2 when they're not in brush guards compared to my KZ1. I think the shape of mine is more similar to the Z9 or my Chikuhodo Lumiere powder brush shape when the Lumiere is in its fluffed up glory. I really wish mine wasn't uneven on the top. It looks like a slope. Here's mine compared to some of the other Chikuhodo squirrel powder brushes I own for size and shape comparisons. Here's the MK-1, MK-2, the Lumiere 2015 Holiday Powder Brush, which is similar to the Z9, the Z1, the head fits into Guerlain meteorites, but I think it's a little too big for this pairing. It picks up and applies the glitter particles from the meteorites onto the face. It grabs a lot of product with the Hourglass Ambient Lighting Powder, but I felt that it didn't amaze me with finishing powder. I was expecting it to feel plush and luxurious during finishing powder application, but it just felt average. Keep in mind that I have tried and have a lot of Fude, and am hard to please because I'm picky. I think this will feel plush and luxurious for most people. It surprised me the most when used with my Makeup Forever Loose powder for setting. It applied similar to gray scroll powder brushes like the Koyudo face, smooth with an even layer and felt incredibly pampering upon application. I love using it as a setting powder brush, the most on top of powder foundation. Despite the uneven bundling, I do quite like it a lot because it's super soft, applies setting powder well, and the red hairs make me happy whenever I look at them. I recommend it if you don't need a lot of powder to set your face with, or if you want a fancy finishing brush to add to your collection. A friend with dry skin loves this brush so much she bought a backup. Try it out if it piques your interest. The KZ2 is a large paddle blush brush with an oval ferrule. The hair length is 45mm, which is powder brush hair length to me. It flares out a lot on the top and the shape varies depending on the bundling. This size is typically too large for blush for my liking and is what I would use for powder instead. It's the least densely packed and airiest brush compared to the rest, but doesn't feel airy during application. It's similar in size and shape to the Chikuhodo B and J507. Flexibility-wise, it has medium flexibility on the face, but if you press down on a surface, it's low. Here it is compared to the Z8 that's been in a brush guard. The Z8 has shorter hairs at 40mm, but the design is similar. I do prefer the KZ1 for powder since this is a little too loosely packed for my liking. I've tried 3 of this same brush at this point and can conclusively say that the KZ2 has the coarsest hair out of all the face brushes from this line. I can feel the hair tips on my skin the most with this brush. Sometimes Fude will come with some of the hair tips that are broken off already, which will scratch my face. If they really bug me, I'll find the hairs and pluck them out. I like to use it with blush and it provides an even, soft, and semi-diffused to diffused finish. It depends on the product you use it with and the pressure you use against your face. The con about using it with blush is that since the head is quite large, it's difficult to get into smaller compacts. I have no problems using it with the Cover FX Blush Duo, but if I want to use it with a Strat, Addiction, or any blush that has an elongated shape, I can only dip part of the head in. When I dip in like that, I don't want to damage the hair tips, so I tend to go in with the lighter hand. This addiction formula is more hard pressed, so it's harder for the KZ hairs to pick it up. And it barely shows up because it wasn't able to pick up much at all, but also the fluffiness of the body doesn't allow it to really pick up the product as easily as, say, the KZ5. If it were more compact, like if I had put it in a brush guard or something, or if it was more densely packed, then it would be able to pick up product better. And here's a Surat blush. The Surat ones are more finely milled and softer, but not as soft as the Cover FX ones, I feel. The Cover FX ones are really powdery. This one, Surat's not powdery. Excuse my lighting and how the blush isn't really showing up on my arm. It's very light. For finishing powder, it applies similarly to other medium density squirrel powder brushes and places a sheer veil on the face. I have two KZ2s to compare. The wood on the handles differs slightly, with the one on the left being more red. The shapes are also slightly different due to bundling variances. The one on the left has more of a flared out shape and is bundled more evenly. It's hard to tell on camera, but the left one is denser. It also has coarser hairs because a lot of the hair tips are blunt. You might not be able to see it on camera, but sometimes the hair tips will come snapped off for some of the hairs, and that's what makes them blunt and feel scratchy on the skin. I can feel the hair tips of the one on the left more than the one on the right because the hair tips are coarser and blunt. The one on the right is smoother and bundled more evenly with a slightly more rounded shape. So I can't do it with both hands, but here it's rounder compared to the one on the left, which is more flared out and like squarish, more tulip shaped. Performance-wise, the denser one obviously picks up more product and applies heavier. I think my friend's brush, which I don't have with me, is bundled the best out of the three with a rounded head and evenly. I do prefer the more rounded shape of the one on the right. The KZ3 is a candlestick-shaped brush with a round ferrule. The stock image and fresh out of the package showed it as a skinny candlestick head, which I was afraid would be too long for my liking. I was contemplating whether or not I should even buy it since I don't like candlestick shapes with long bodies. I'm happy to say it turned bulbous post-wash, and I love the shape, flexibility, and volume. The size is definitely on the large side for a highlight brush. It's more of a powder brush size with a hair length of 45 millimeters. It's not overly dense, both medium in flexibility and density. It's also very fluffy. It has the second coarsest hairs after the KZ2. I can get into smaller areas of the face due to the tapered tip. I think it's perfectly designed. The design is similar to the Chikuhodo J103, Koyudo BP10, and all the other candlestick goat powder brushes out there. Here it is compared with the Nars Brightener on the right. I haven't come across a squirrel brush with this taper, size, and hair length until this one. A con is that mine is bundled unevenly, which is disappointing considering it's their most expensive line. I miss the impeccable bundling of my Z-series brushes from years ago. The head is lopsided, with one side having more hair than the other, and I have not laid it flat or put it in a brush guard. I have not put any of these brushes in brush guards. It's the most versatile brush out of the entire Kazan line in my opinion. It's a one and done kind of brush. It can be used for powder, blush, highlight, setting the under eyes, and finishing powder. I'm sure you can also use it for bronzer, but I don't intend on using it for that since I don't fancy candlestick shapes for bronzer. The most fascinating thing about this brush is that despite being very fluffy, the hairs are able to grab and apply highlighter strongly. I used it with the Anastasia Beverly Hills Nicole Glow Kit in the shade Daydream, which is orange. It didn't pick up a lot of pigment and mostly glitter, which I find squirrel hair typically does for highlights. The pigment was light but still there, a light orange instead of a vibrant one. It applied the chunky glitter, but it was an even application that didn't look like a strip of highlight on the top of the cheekbones. I used it with the Nars Hot Fix palette highlight and two blushes in the middle. It applied the highlight intensely with the metallic sheen. The finish was stronger than with the KZ5 for the same amount of swipes into the pan. With the second blush in the palette, which is firmer than the third color, it applied lightly. With the third color, which is softer pressed, it's able to pick up and deposit color effortlessly. Highlight, second blush, third blush. I used it with the highlight from the Suku 101 palette. It applied just like the Nars Hot Fix palette, intense with the metallic sheen. It applied more intensely than the Surratt highlight brush, but in a larger area and more semi-diffused. It's outstanding and applies highlight heavier than the Surratt highlight brush and KZ5. I also tried it out with the Milani Baked Blush in Rose Doro. Milani blushes are baked, which means they start out as creams and then turn into powders through heat. It's kind of hard to explain, but baked products look firm and feel firm, yet I consider them soft since they're finely milled and aren't your traditional pressed powder. Squirrel brushes pair well with baked products because they're easy to pick up due to being finely milled. The Milani blushes are highly pigmented, and it's easy to go overboard with this formula if you use a goat brush or a densely packed synthetic brush. The KZ3 produced a very pretty buildable finish. I initially didn't see much color, and I think people who like subtle blush would love this brush with this type of formula together. Very light, but it shows up on the face, I promise. Perfect pairing. Couple more times. I was able to build it up to the intensity that I liked without going overboard. I finally found the perfect blush to use with Rose Doro. I actually hadn't touched this blush in a long time because I never liked the way it applied with other brushes. I also used it with Guerlain Meteorites, and it grabbed a lot of product without kicking up powder. It fits nicely in the container with room to spare, which means you can swirl it around in the container. It applies evenly without flicking up the glitter particles on the face and getting fallout everywhere. The glitter particles are smoothed onto the face with a brilliant finish. If you use Meteorites and want to try a new brush for it, I highly recommend picking this up. I truly think this is a magical brush, and I don't know what kind of fairy dust they sprinkled on it, but this is pretty much my favorite face brush out of the entire line. It's Glitter City today. The KZ4 is a round cheek brush with a flat top. It shares the same shape and hair length with the Takumi T4 at 35mm. For comparison, the RC2's hair length is 33mm. The RC2 was in a brush guard. The RC2 is firmer than the KZ4. I wasn't interested in this brush at all when I was looking to buy brushes from this line because round red squirrel cheek brushes are not my favorite. I find that they don't blend well. Since I really enjoyed the first two brushes I bought from the line and the hairs are different from the other brands, I was excited to try this out. Aesthetically speaking, it is one of the cutest brushes in the line in my opinion. The head is medium-sized and very soft, just like the KZ1. The hairs are extremely flexible and there's barely any resistance when pushed up against the back of my hand. It's not springy or elastic. Initially, instead of dipping the head into the product at a 90-degree angle, I swept it at a lower angle since I didn't want to damage the delicate hairs. I set my face with lots of powder before using this brush to ensure it would apply smoothly. I first swept into Hourglass Incandescent Electra twice and noticed it picked up a lot of the white highlighter portion with barely any of the blush pigment. Hourglass has different blush formulas and finishes, and Incandescent Electra is part of the strobe blush line, which means it has the strobe powder mixed into it to provide a glowy finish. It mainly applied the tiny shimmers without any pigment. I was able to buff with it, but I would advise to be extremely careful when buffing. I tried to push the buffing power to see how far it could go and blend, and broke 2 hair tips in the process. I'd say the blendability on the face is about 30%, which isn't that bad. The strange thing is that during buffing, the center is quite firm and immovable, while the rest of the outer layer of the hairs are flexible. It might just be my brush, I'm not sure. I swapped into the product 3 more times and still wasn't happy with the pigmentation level, so I did it 3 more times, totaling 8 sweeps for a lot of pigment to show up on my cheeks. Since the head is very bendy, it applies in a larger surface area, similar to the RC2. For more pigment to show up on my cheeks, I prefer to dab the brush on my cheeks first before buffing. The finish was similar to my Tanseido YWC-17, which is made out of supremely soft Chikuhodo, pink and concentrated in one spot. I wasn't able to blend the color out that well with this brush without buffing vigorously. Another time I went into the Suku 101 blush compact at a 90-degree angle because I was like, screw it. With a tremendously pigmented and softer formula like Suku, it was easy to pick up the pigment, but the hair tip breaking problem reappeared when I went to apply. It was able to blend better this time around with this formula, but the hairs were not meant for this shape and level of buffing power at all. I could see the hair tips and hairs coming off as I buffed, which was horrifying. The hairs are so incredibly weak. My Shosho Long Red Squirrel cheek brush does not do this. So while you can buff with this brush, the best way to use it is to stamp the product on and then use another brush to buff, which completely defeats the purpose of having a round brush. Another thing I dislike about it is that I have to be mindful of where I place the color initially, otherwise it ends up blending out and being too low for my liking. I normally don't really have to worry about hair breakage or brush placement with gray and blue squirrel brushes during application. I've buffed with my Chikuhodo RC2, which is round many times, and have never seen hair tips breaking off during use. I do not like this brush at all, but your mileage may vary since everyone's application methods, skin types, and preferences are different. The KZ5 is a tapered highlight brush with a pinched oval ferrule. It's medium-sized with medium flexibility. The design and size is basically a duplicate of the Takumi T5. The hair length of the KZ5 is 35 mm, while the T5 is 38 mm. I love this for targeted blush, and it's one of my favorites from the line. It applies blush without any issues and doesn't leave the blush in one spot, which makes it difficult to blend out. You do need to be careful when picking up soft pressed and loose blush with it because it can pick up a lot if you prefer to build up your blush. It applies highlighter lighter than the KZ3, even though the hairs are less fluffed out and more compact. You can also use this for setting under eye concealer if you have dry skin or are using powder product underneath. I personally would not use it for that area with liquid or cream products since the hairs will snap easily. The Chikuhodo hairs on the left are coarser, and my KZ5 actually has some split ends on them, so you need to be extra careful when using these. My old Shosho Long Red Squirrel hairs on the right are silkier and don't have any split ends. Here's the KZ5 on the left compared to the Koyudo Red Squirrel cheek brush on the right. Koyudo's hair on the right are pretty red, just like Tanseido's, Shosho Long's, and my KZ1. I love the Koyudo black handles and their red makie. Here's the KZ5 on the left once again, and the Tanseido YAQ-17 on the right. The Tanseido hairs are very thin and fine and delicate. The softness scale from softest to least soft to me is KZ1, 4, 5, 3, and then 2. All things considered, I'm delightfully impressed by the line and think it was tastefully done. It would be ideal if the quality control issues and bundling were better. It's not exactly suitable for my skin type, which makes me hesitant to buy backups, but I can see this line working marvelously for those with dry or mature skin. Ultimately, it's a series that needs to be cautiously babied, and I prefer the Z series over the Homare series. What do you think of the line? Do you have any? Let me know what your thoughts are below. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in my next video. Hope you stay safe and healthy. Bye!